So, as we seek to become disciple makers that bear forth fruit in every good work, we need a lot of formation from different kinds of leadership from those who are ahead of us on the journey. Today, we're going to look at this acronym CTACM that I learned from Chuck Wood as we look at the roles of a disciple maker as modeled by Jesus, so that we can understand what roles of formation might we be playing and might we need to look for to be those that bear fruit in every good work in our journey. First, the catalyst. A catalyst is an agent of change and transformation. So when a leader functions as a catalyst, they're those that are sent by God, and their words, their example, their very presence is forcing a reaction in those that hear and experience their message. So in Luke 4:18-19, we see Jesus on a mission, and it says that the Spirit of the Lord has come upon him. God has come on him and anointed him, given him this anointing power to go forth and proclaim the good news and even see God move in a powerful way through his ministry. We see this begin to be modeled in Mark 1. So Mark chapter 1 and verses 14-18. And here Jesus is going about Galilee, proclaiming this good news of the kingdom. And then he begins to run into those that he's saying, "Follow me and I'll make you become fishers of men." And he is catalyzing them and forcing them to respond to this kingdom message. So Jesus functioned as a catalyst. And in our journey, we usually are ignited at some point to begin to enter into this journey by a catalytic experience of leadership. So after we've been catalyzed into action, we experience oftentimes this teaching experience. So teachers present and transfer information in a way that forms their students' way of thinking or living, often by teaching a mental framework. So Jesus was a teacher, and it'd be hard to dispute that. We see the Sermon on the Mount. We see him doing a lot of stand and deliver teaching. But when we think of teaching, it oftentimes comes with information and not a whole lot else. So there's a lot of examples we could give here, but in this case, we're going to look at Mark 4, verses 1-34, which is a long section in which Jesus gives a parable and then ultimately a framework on which his disciples can begin to understand how to live out this way of life that he's calling them into. So a teacher gives that information that becomes a framework for a way of life. Jesus did this in Mark 4, which we won't look at in depth, but he was definitely a teacher. So we too need gifted teachers to help us see and grapple with biblical themes and frameworks that are going to shape our worldview. And they're also going to begin to cause us to cause integrated and deeper application of that worldview and of those thoughts into the way that we live our everyday lives. Jesus was also a coach, and a good one. So a coach differs from a teacher because now we're beginning to learn skills in an on-the-job training, hands-on. A coach causes us to begin to practice and engage with our skills in an action-oriented way. We see Jesus functioning as a coach really clearly in Luke chapter 10, and in this longer passage, verses 1-24, we see him sending out 72 disciples, and then after this, in verse 17, they're coming back and they are saying, "Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name." And so Jesus begins to give some coaching on the ground, on the job, as they are practicing, putting into practice these ministry skills that they're learning, and that's the key word here is skills. Then he's giving them feedback on the application of those skills in practice in real time. So information frameworks without some sort of application and skills that engage it, there becomes a disconnect between that information and living it out. That's why coaching is really key. We need coaching. So Jesus also functioned as an advisor. And so we need advisors. These are those that offer feedback and insight into specific situational advice and application of the teaching that we might have learned. So in Mark 9, verse 17 through 29, we see Jesus functioning as an advisor. So a man in the crowd brings his son to the disciples and has them begin to pray for him, but they cannot help this man's son. And so after Jesus goes indoors and he takes care of this evil spirit, they come to him privately. They say, why couldn't we drive it out? And he said, this kind only comes out through prayer. And another version says through prayer and fasting. So he comes in this situational specific application of the information they've been learning, and he gives them advice. We need advisors. So we need to be able to approach people who, in one specific situation, I'm hitting this roadblock, I'm coming up against this barrier, what do you think I should do? And they help us to get around that specific situational barrier or challenge through advice. So one note here, I think advisor differs from coach in that coaching is usually hands-on application in the moment, whereas advice tends to be more of that across a cup of coffee, and application happens later of the advice that's given. Both are important, but that's kind of the distinction. Finally, we see and know that Jesus was a great mentor to his disciples. And I think a great example of this in the life of Jesus is actually not in Jesus' direct interaction, but it comes afterwards. As in John 14:25 to 26, Jesus promises that he's not going to leave them alone, that he is going to send his Spirit to come and teach them all things and even remind them of things that he said. So having catalyzed, having begun to give them a framework and giving them advice and coaching through hands-on skills, he's now coming along as mentor to begin to help them with guidance as the movement continues to grow under their leadership as he takes a step back, but is still definitely with them, still guiding the process in a mentoring role. So mentorship is ongoing, and it's an ongoing role in which this mentor is helping the mentee grow into really owning principles. So earlier on, there might have been a more high directive, do this, do this, do this. Now the mentor is helping draw out some of those principles so that the mentee can begin to see them and own and understand the why behind the what that they initially learned earlier on. So each of these roles is important and helpful, and in fact, most disciple makers will not fulfill all of these roles in the life of their disciple. And as a disciple, we need to be able to know when we need these roles in our life and reach out and find and ask God to provide for us a mentor or a coach if we need skills, an advisor for a specific situation, a teacher to change our framework, or even catalysts as we're learning new things from the Lord.